Thank you all for joining. Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Srini Kulatur, Director of Data Brackets. I'll be your host for today's event. Today's session will be focusing on backup and disaster recovery, best practices to defeat ransomware. We have two excellent speakers to share their experience with us today. Before we introduce our speakers, there are a couple of housekeeping rules that I want to go over. The webinar today will be approximately for about 45 minutes long and including a Q&A session at the end for about 10 minutes. All lines will be muted during the presentation. I encourage you to submit your questions as they come up so that they can be placed in the queue for a live response. To submit a question, please simply type in your question in the chat module on the right side of your screen. For those of you who have already submitted your questions, thank you so much. We'll be addressing them at the end of the prepared presentation. We'll be sending you the link to the recorded webinar, and a copy of the presentation is available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel for you to download. Please allow me to take a few minutes to talk about Data Brackets. Data Brackets is a cybersecurity and compliance audit consulting company specializing in data protection requirements. We assist organizations in developing and implementing practices to secure sensitive data and comply with industry regulations like HIPAA High-Tech, GDPR, CCPA, and others. We offer education via specialized webinars, training, and workshops. We also offer a variety of compliance libraries to record and document related to compliance information. So for more complete list of services we provide, you are welcome to visit our website at databrackets.com and contact us for a customized approach. Without further ado, our distinguished speakers for today webinar are Jamie Pleasant and Balu Subramani from our friends at SamIT. I will have them introduce themselves. With that, Jamie and Balu, thanks for joining us today's webinar, and thanks for sharing your expertise and your time. Jamie and Balu, please.
Hey, thanks a lot, Srini. Good afternoon. A warm welcome to all participants to this webinar on backup and disaster recovery, best practices to defeat ransomware. This webinar is presented by SamITSolutions, your IT partner in growth. This afternoon, Jamie Pleasant's Chief Operations Officer and I, Balakrishna Subramani, Lead Analyst Cybersecurity, will be presenting on behalf of Samudra Vijay, CEO, SamITSolutions. At SamIT, we provide managed IT and cybersecurity services to several organizations in the triangle. Our value proposition is performance, productivity, and protection, and we have contributed to the success of our customers for over a decade.
Hi everyone, Jamie here. Yeah, I've been with SamIT for about 7 years, and across that time span, I've seen a lot of attacks, dealt with a lot of attacks, helped a lot of businesses recover from ransomware specifically, and we're hoping to get across how important it is to do your backups so that you can recover quickly.
Thank you, Jamie. One insecurity that all businesses, irrespective of size, have is ransomware. We decided to put together a webinar on ransomware with special focus on how backups have helped businesses recover from ransomware attacks. In fact, a good backup is at the center of any successful disaster recovery strategy. This webinar starts with basic concepts about information systems and cybersecurity. It introduces participants to ransomware and provides a holistic approach to understanding and managing backups in an environment constantly threatened by ransomware. We have some references and resources for you, and we have tried to also make the language of this webinar as simple as possible. So if it's getting very technical, please let us know in the chat window, and we will try to rearrange the vocabulary accordingly. So the way we look at cyberspace is very important. And here is a very simple way of understanding what we are trying in cyberspace. So what we do is that we look at two worlds, real and virtual. The real world is the world around us, the beaches, the mountains, what we eat, the air we breathe. And the virtual world is databases, internet, telephones, satellites, network devices, etc., etc. The world, please note that dreams are not part of the virtual world, unfortunately, or not unfortunately. The virtual world is something that is created by information and communication technology. We use the word ICT for that. Now, what exactly is the virtual world constituted of? Let's look at what is there in cyberspace. So, cyberspace consists of cyber assets. So, one point that I'd like you to keep in the back of your mind is there are essentially three cyber assets. We call them hardware, software, and networks. So all this about protection is to protect hardware, to protect our software, which is normally in the form of data and programs, and protect our networks. All these collectively become part of what we call our information systems. So let's now look at certain terms. So one term that is important for us is the term cybersecurity. So what is cybersecurity? So for the purpose of cybersecurity, we are going to refer to the definition provided by the Committee on National Security Systems Instruction, which is called CNSSI. Now, this committee provides definitions, and we're going to use that. So on your screen is the definition of cybersecurity and the definition of a cyber attack. So something that's coming through cyberspace and attacking us is going to be a cyber attack. Now, ransomware is a form of cyber attack. That's what I'm leading up to. There are also a couple of other terms that we need to get used to, or we need to be aware of, which is in the next slide. And this is malware and compromise. So I just want you to quickly look up these two. There is a lot of text out there, but I'm afraid that clarity requires a little of text at least, and there we have it. So the idea is that if there is a compromise, that is, if information leaks out, if information is modified without proper authority, those are examples of compromise. Ransomware is a form of compromise of an information system. Similarly, ransomware is a malware. That is, it is a program that, it upsets an operation, it disrupts an operation by a piece of code that is executed unnecessarily or unintentionally. Let's look at more of that now. In the next slide, we are talking about three important things that you need to keep in mind as regards cybersecurity. And these three words are part of the repertoire of any cybersecurity professional. They are called confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the idea is that confidentiality is we need to prevent people who are not supposed to be having that information from having it. Your personal information identification, if let us say your SSN is leaked or somebody gets your SSN without a proper authority, that's a confidentiality issue. Similarly, integrity is modification of some information. So for example, let us say you have written your SSN, but somebody has altered it. That's an integrity issue. Availability is when information is not accessible to people who need it. So you are connected to a website and you're unable to connect because the website has been hacked and it's down now. Those are examples of availability being an issue. In the next slide, what we're going to do is we're going to see what exactly is business risk. Now, I'd like you to think about what is all this ransomware talk all about? Now, why would the bad guys come after me? Now, the simple answer is that you have something of value that they can hold you to ransom about. So the graph in this particular slide shows that as the value of a particular asset goes up, so does the risk from the point of view of ransomware. But what I'd like you to note is it is not the value as in the commercial value of the asset. It is the utility value of the asset. There's a famous saying that for the want of a nail, the war was lost. And there's a huge story about it. But very simply putting it, in that particular situation, the nail was the most significant, most important thing that was required. Now, how a ransomware attacker would typically think is he or she would just try and get that nail and keep it with them and not give it to you. By denying you that nail, they are actually winning the entire war. That's how ransomware works. And that is why it has a lot of potential danger in terms of business. Now, I'd like you to please think about who can get victimized by ransomware. There is no business that is spared, big or small. Here are some examples on the screen. At this point, what I'd like to do is give you a slight break from my talk and ask Jamie about his experience with ransomware and say something about the next slide where we are talking about a ransomware attack on a particular county. Jamie, could you please go to the next slide and talk about it?
Sure. So first, I want to preface this story by explaining to you kind of what ransomware is. Basically, it's this malware that gets into your network, your systems, encrypts your files, and holds it for ransom. You'll typically receive a note on the system that has been compromised, giving you instructions on what you need to do to pay the person that has infected your system to decrypt your files. Typically, we would recommend that you do not give in, that you don't pay, because that encourages these people to continue, which is not what we want them to do. What we want you to do is have measures in place to prevent, combat, and then restore your information. All right, so in March of this year, there was one ransomware named Ryuk, which came about in 2018, which was derived from another ransomware strain called Hermes. What it does is it targets enterprises due to their higher revenue, and puts higher ransoms on their data. So far, they've ransomed millions of dollars, and how it comes about is through spam emails. So it only takes one person with the right access within an organization to receive that one email that they click on, download one file, and that entire organization's resources and systems can be compromised. What happened in March was just that with Durham County. they believe that they were infected by a spam email. One of the county's workers was infected, and that took down most of the county's phone systems, not 911 or anything like that, but just to give you an idea of the weight that this can have. Just by clicking on that email, it brought down an entire county's phone system. It also encrypted shadow copies as well. It did not get their backups, which was good, so they were able to restore relatively quickly. But we'll explain what shadow copies are very soon. Okay, Balu, you can take it.
Thanks. So what Jamie said, I'd like to explain using this. So essentially what I'm going to do is, here is a network, and this network, I'm going to press a key. If you can press a key, you will see what happens and how an attack actually unfolds. So, so a user clicks on something. 1 second, I think you're going a little too fast. So the idea is that okay. So a user clicks on a malicious link on the laptop C5. Now let's see what happens. A program is installed on that laptop, and this is the first thing that happens. Next, the program gets replicated across the network onto various systems. Next, it starts contacting a server which is outside your network where the bad guys are. Now, the communication has started with your network and the bad guys. So if you press the next key, you will see that the communication has started. Now comes one fine day when you press the next key. All your systems are infected. So this is what Jamie was saying, and this is what has happened. So this is just a visualization of what Jamie was talking about. Now, things don't happen overnight. So if you look at the next slide, what you'll see is the ransomware note and then the defenses. So the idea here is that we are looking at how to defend ourselves from ransomware attacks. Now, you will have to, there are 3 things that we are going to do, right? We can either have preventive measures, detective measures, and corrective measures. Let's see what those are. Right? So preventive is you're trying to avoid or minimize the impact before the event occurs. Detective, you try to identify whether you are already having a ransomware within your system, and you are able to identify if and when that event occurs. And corrective is you need to recover from an attack and get back to normal operations. So let's see what are these defenses and how backup is going to play a critical role. So let's go on to the next slide to see how exactly a backup can play a role. I'd like Jamie to talk a little more about how in a particular situation, a preventative measure has actually helped a customer in his own experience. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you, Balu. So about 5 years ago, 2015, we had just taken over the IT for a manufacturing company here in North Carolina. We hadn't quite been able to set up everything yet, but they had a file server that was encrypted totally. How it came about is one of the users clicked on an email that had access to all of the company's schematics, since it was a manufacturing company, and downloaded one file and encrypted everything. We did not have a backup at the time because we were just taking over. They did not have a backup. And at the time, there was no decryptor, publicly available decryptor available for that strain of ransomware. So what we ended up doing was relying on shadow copy, which is a built-in Windows function that needs to be enabled. It's not by default enabled, so please. Anyway, so shadow copy was enabled, and we were able to restore from that, which is very nice. However, that is just a preventative measure because shadow copies are not immune to ransomware. The strain I mentioned earlier, Ryuk, is capable of encrypting shadow copies. Shadow copies are stored directly on the drive that is where the files exist. So if you have files on your C drive and you enable shadow copies for C, they're stored on C. However, they do require a specific link, a special link to be accessed, which is why some ransomware does not encrypt those. But it's a very good preventative measure that I would suggest everyone look into.
Thanks, Jamie. We'd also be reiterating this part later when we summarize. So here are some threat indicators. So the point is, as I said earlier, nothing happens overnight or instantly. There is a buildup. There is a time when there are indicators. We call them threat indicators. There is also another word which you're going to come across, which is called indicators of compromise. So these are some of the threat indicators. An indicator of compromise is, let's say you enter your office and all your files are encrypted and you're not able to access your machine. That is an indication that you're being compromised. So IOC is important, and you need to recognize an IOC if it ever you need to encounter it. I hope you never need to, but just in case. So these threat indicators, I'd like you to please look at it, make sure that you resolve them as and when, especially when it comes to emails. Phishing is a very, very popular method of ransomware getting into a network. So please don't click on links. Please don't click on links, especially which are not from people whom you know. Be aware of that. Those are some precautions. We have training programs and awareness, security awareness training programs where we talk a little more about this and almost brainwash you into never clicking on a link. So anyway, more about that later. But let's now get into certain other definitions. On the next slide, what we have is, we have the idea of a backup. So we've been talking about backups, but what is a backup? A backup is nothing but a copy of your files and programs. So you can take backups of user level information. You can take backups of system level information. You can also take backups of things like your documentation regarding your security procedures and practices, your policies, right? So there are so many things that you can take a backup of. One word that you'll come across is something called system image. A system image is the entire contents of your hard disk, including the operating system and installed programs. So if you have a copy of your system image, you can always restore very easily. So that is one of the important things regarding backups. You must also know what to backup. It is just not about copying your stuff across. A couple of terms that I'd like you to get familiar with is in the next slide. So you will come across something called contingency planning. A contingency is something that is likely to happen, but you cannot predict, right? So one contingency planning, for example, if you have a key to your main door of the house, you have a duplicate just in case you misplace it. Now that's a contingency plan, right? Whereas a disaster is a major disruption to your service. So your business process, like for example, if you take the utility company like Duke, if they are not able to supply power, it's a disaster. You also have another word called incident, which is typically something that jeopardizes the confidentiality, integrity, or availability an event or a circumstance, and you lose information or somebody is not following procedures. Those are incidents. So in this slide, what we're looking at is we're talking about backup storage locations. Now, these are words that I would like you to keep in the back of your mind because it is important from the point of view of backup. So here in this slide, we are seeing a network. And in this network, what we're seeing is the desktop C1 has been backed up onto the cloud, which is offsite. Desktop C1 is also backed up on site. And we have something called near site backup. And we also have an offline local backup. So I hope there are multiple copies. Now, this is an important idea in backups. So let's look at how many copies should I take, which is what the next slide is all about. So there is a rule called the 3-to-1 rule for backups. So you have to at least take 3 copies. 2 of them should be on different media. So for example, you have one copy on a hard disk, and on the same hard disk, you have one more copy. That's a bad idea. The other copy must either be on a different hard disk or maybe on an external hard drive, storage device perhaps. And the third point is you must have at least 1 copy offsite. So for example, typical natural disasters, you can have fire, you can have earthquakes. Ransomware also is a disaster, but not a natural one, a human-made bad actor kind of event. But the point is, you must have 1 copy offsite.
And Balu, do you mind if I interject?
Of course, please, Jamie. Thank you.
Okay. So one way you can manage to get that 3 copies is to make sure you do have the offsite copy. Sure, you have your on-site copy, but also NIST and FTC, two big members in the security field, recommend that you have an offline backup. And what does that mean? It means that you have some backup media that is disconnected in every way from your source. So if you can manage to do that either through rotating drives with something as simple as Windows Server backup, that's helpful. Because a lot of these ransomwares are capable of encrypting your backup. Now, with the scenario mentioning Durham County, theirs were not compromised, but it was very likely that it could have happened. So just keep that in mind. So offline is very important.
Thank you, Jamie. So what are the considerations for backup? So one of the points is you also need to think in terms of how quickly you need to recover, how quickly you need to restore your operations, how much of space is going to be taken. So here's a table which you can perhaps use as a planning tool, perhaps. Now, please note that SamIT can provide these services. So in the event you're interested in going through all this in greater detail, we are always available. The other thing is a backup and recovery strategy. Now, it is very, very important to think in terms of prevention, identification or detection, and correction. Now, this particular slide is talking about correction. So in the event you have been compromised, how quickly are you planning to recover? What is your recovery strategy? Now, based on that, you need to plan your backups. As indicated here, if particular information is of a low priority, you can go with tape backup. But if you have mission critical information, you need backup, which is in the form of mirrored systems. Now, a hot site is a particular environment that is up and alive very, very quickly. Whereas a cold site is something that has to be, a little work has to be done before that can come up as an operational environment. Okay. So this particular slide is basically to help you work and think through that particular aspect of recovery. Now, last but not the least, let us say you got your backup, right? Are you sure that your backups are good? Because you're going to rely on your backups at a later point in time if required. So if you don't have a good copy, then you're in trouble anyway. So one thing that NIST recommends, or the guidelines from NIST say, is that please test the reliability and integrity of your backups. Make sure that your backups are not accidentally modified. Don't allow somebody else to modify your backups. Transfer them to alternate storage locations. And there is also this last point called dual authorization, which is, let us say a particular backup has to be deleted. It should need the authorization of more than one person. So for example, I should not be able to delete a backup, because if I do something accidentally, then I'm putting the organization and its operations at great risk. So the idea is that there is a need to have dual authorization when it comes to deletion of backups. So this is broadly what we have in store this afternoon. I just want to say something about SamITSolutions, and I don't want to make it look like marketing material, but the idea is that we have a service delivery framework, and these are some of the services that we offer. This is a very, let us say, this is a list specially meant for this program. We have a host of other services, but this in a nutshell should give you an idea as to what we can do for you. So in summary, Jamie, would you like to run through this with the participants?
Sure. So it all starts with the users, and I hope you've noticed that that's a common concept throughout everything that we've talked about here, especially with spam emails, Durham County story, and the story that we've personally experienced. Users need to be trained on how to identify spam emails, scam emails, phishing emails, identify what they're downloading, safe websites, and the like. It's also important that you routinely scan your devices on your network for malware. You can use anti-malware software such as WebRoot, which is what we use. Ensure that you're securing your network through special firewall policies such as intrusion protection systems. If you have a built-in antivirus engine within your firewall, that helps too. I also mentioned configuring shadow copies. That takes up as much space as you allow it. So when you configure it, you can say use up to 10% of your drive space to keep previous versions of your files. You can change that later if you need to. It'll adjust accordingly. And it'll adjust when it takes the backups based off of that. The biggest thing, which is why we're even having this webinar, is to take backups, because nothing's 100%. You can train your users. They can be the smartest people in the world. You can have the best anti-malware software, the best firewall, the best policies, but nothing can protect you 100%. So your backups need to be in place so that you can restore if anything does happen. Have your local backup, have your offsite backup, but also have an offline backup locally so you can quickly restore if anything does happen to those other two. And then keep your security practices agile, not bureaucratic. This is one area of your business, of your organization, that needs to quickly be able to change. If you're always going back and forth, having to approve new procedures, it's going to happen. You're going to get compromised. Of course, go back, review them, have review sessions, but put what you need to in place to protect yourself.
Thanks, Jamie. So we are open to questions and we hope to answer them for you. So please bring it on.
Thank you, Balu and Jamie, for the wonderful review of the backup and the recovery and how to prepare yourself for the ransomware attacks. So my specific takeaway was 3-to-1 rule. I thought like that was really, really good approach, maintaining 3 copies, 2 on site and 1 at least off site. And also, especially the secure backups, I think like you're talking about, especially against insider threats. Having this dual authorization, I think that is again a great idea. Thanks a lot. And again, participants, if you have more questions, please go ahead and use the questions option on your GoToWebinar panel to submit your question. So I already got a few questions that are lined up here. Jamie and Balu, if you guys can go ahead and address them,
Sure.
if you don't mind. So the first question is, can you talk a little bit more about the different backup tools and in terms of the cost and the manageability of them and stuff, the easy to manage. So do you guys want to give some insight about that, Jamie and Balu?
Sure.
So, Jamie, I'd like you to please take this question.
Okay. So we've used all types. We've used Windows Server Backup. Again, that's a good one, so you can get the offline backup too. Very simple. I just set up a couple of drives and then rotate them. Connect one night, take it out the next night, plug in the other. That's how you can have your 2 local backups, one online, one offline. We've had experience with Carbonite. We've had an experience with Carbonite. It does work, but the restore can be sort of complicated. So what we like is we've used ArcServe, and I personally love that, but it can be a little costly. So what we've done is we've created our own solution that's cheaper, it works. So just contact us if you're interested in that. The cost of that is, I believe, 5 cents per gigabyte. So it's, yeah, so it's extremely cost effective. Another for virtual machines, we use Altaro. We are a reseller partner with them. Very effective at backing up Hyper-V. We are a Microsoft shop for the most part. So they've been extremely helpful in that aspect.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'd also like to add that sometimes in my experience with regards backups, I have written a lot of scripts in a Unix Ubuntu kind of environment. So, and also archived into Glacier and those kinds of systems. Those are like putting data into cold storage. So from the cost perspective, those would be a lot cheaper, but restoration is going to be an issue that you need to consider if you're putting data into archival systems and cold storage.
So when you say Glacier, it's Amazon Glacier, right? AWS Glacier?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yes.
Oh, right. Great. Thanks, Balu and Jamie, for that. And then the next question is, looks like you had a slide on threat indicators. And so someone wants to know what are like some of the threat indicators on mobile phones? I know like you had emails and other stuff, but is there any additional threat indicator that they need to be aware of?
So when it comes to mobile phones, the phone by itself, I don't have any specific incidents that I have come across. But then it's like having a asymptomatic behavior. I receive something by on the phone, I forward it to somebody else, and that is where it can strike. So it may not affect the phone per se, but the phone can be an effective conduit.
Gotcha.
So that's the way I would look at it.
I can also speak on the fact of iPhones. I know recently and previously before they have had some issues with receiving certain characters in a text message, and then that resulting in a broken phone afterwards. This happened as recently as 1 to 2 months ago. You just receive a specific set of characters in a text message. You don't even have to read it, and your phone is broken. So a big thing to do is just to make sure that your phone is updated. I know some people are sometimes against that because they feel like it breaks their phone, but honestly, security is more important.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Jimmy and Balu. And I think like we'll probably make the next one as the last question. So what's your opinion about virtual desktops? And maybe you can talk about some of the backup or ransomware related issues in the virtual desktops, if you don't mind.
Okay, so virtual desktops have the benefit of being able to just being rolled back. Usually there's a golden image with everyone's software applications. However, in the event that you have, say, a file server that your virtual desktop does access, and that becomes compromised, then you need to have your backup in place for that server. But virtual desktops are very useful for businesses that need to have quick access for users, especially now, because usually they're accessible remotely. It's very quick for the user, very easy, very simple, and it's familiar.
Gotcha. So Jamie and Balu, if our audience have any other follow-up questions, what is the best way to reach you?
We are available on info@SamITSolutions.com.
SamITSolutions.
You can always Bing or Google for us.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or if you just want to write down our number, very simple, 919-800-0044. Again, that's 919-800-0044. You'll get in touch with our dispatch, who can just get you in touch with whoever you need to talk to.
Gotcha. Thank you, Jamie and Balu, for your time. I especially liked your low-tech simulation of the ransomware attack. It was really.
Thank you. Anything for our participants.
Okay, awesome. And then like a couple of quick things, folks. One is we have an exciting event lined up for next Thursday around same time, 1 p.m. How to become partner of Data Bracket and offer or extend your existing services with compliance assessment and security assessment. So it's at 1 p.m. scheduled at 1 p.m. So if you want to register for the event, go to databrackets.com/events to register. And here are the ways you can reach out to Data Brackets, info@databrackets.com. Like, of course, like we are available on Facebook, Twitter, and all this other good stuff. So that pretty much concludes our webinar for today. Thank you all for attending and participating in our webinar. You all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.